Welcome to Advice for Grad Students. I'm Phil Haun, your host. I am an MIT grad from 2010, and today I have with me Aidan Milliff, who is our most recent MIT PhD. Welcome, Aidan. I understand you're in Berkeley, California as we speak on your getting ready for your postdoc at Stanford.
That's correct. Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah, man, congrats on that postdoc. Today's topic for Advice for Grad Students is on the dissertation topic, the committee, and the colloqs. So why in the world, Aidan, did you pick this of the list of 24 topics that I sent to you?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest decisions that you make in grad school. And it's something I've had the opportunity to talk about with a number of current students. And so I thought it would be cool to maybe share some of the things I've learned to do and not do a little more broadly.
Okay, well, it is an awful big topic. So let's go ahead and give it over to you. What advice do you have on this enormous, important topic?
Yeah, okay, three things that I've kind of distilled over my own failure to do this process very well at the start. Thing one, the life cycle of a dissertation is a decade. Hard to think about when you're a third year, but you got to think about choosing a project that's going to sustain you and interest you for 10 years, because that is probably about how long it takes to get the book off of your plate. So in the name of picking something that will hold your interest for a decade, I think that it can be helpful to start with a list of characteristics of things that you want to see in a dissertation. Some people start with, a gap in the literature, a question they find really important. But what I started with is a list of characteristics that I wanted a dissertation project to have. What region of the world do I want to focus on? What are the types of data that I enjoy working with? What do I like reading? What do I want to contribute to? And then I tried to build a project that had a lot of those characteristics. And the last thing I would say is that it's helpful at the start to kind of make a decision about whether you're going to try and own a dependent variable, which is the way a lot of SSP dissertations go, or whether you're going to pick a dependent variable that's kind of already in the literature and explore variation in a new independent variable. I think the DV is sometimes a little safer option, because if you're the only one trying to explain it, then you can always come up with a new explanation for it. And the IV really lets you get into conversation with other people very quickly, but it's a little riskier that your IV may not connect to anything important. So those are kind of the trade-offs to think about.
All right. Well, how about what advice do you have as far as the committee?
Yeah. So here's what I would say. A lot of people think about individual relationships and individual substantive fit. That's very important, but I think that it's good to picture the committee as assembling a team. And in the ideal world, every member of that team is going to bring something different. And it's not necessarily important that any single member of that team have a perfect substantive fit with what you're working on. I would say that good relationships are a really important part of building a committee. You want to have people whose advice that you appreciate and people who you trust. And then you also want your committee, to the extent possible, to relate well to each other or work well together. Think about potential areas of disagreement or potential pain points and decide for yourself whether that pain is worth it from a substantive expertise perspective. The last thing there on a committee is that individual work style matters a heck of a lot. And so you have to reflect a little bit at the start and see whether you're a person who thrives with externally imposed structure or a person who thrives with a lot of freedom, because different dissertation chairs tend to run things different ways. And if you have a compatible work style with your chair, you're probably gonna be a lot happier.
Okay, that's some good advice on the committees, all right. How about how the colloqs affected the work of your dissertation? What worked well and what would you advise as far as improving that?
Yeah, totally. So one thing I would say about colloqs before I get into that, and this is maybe a more general observation, is that once you form a committee, pretty much everything from that point to your dissertation defense is just a negotiation between you and your committee. And so because everything's a negotiation between you and your committee about what to do, what qualifies as passing the requirements, you can end up using colloqs in a lot of different ways. Here's what I think is a good way to think about them. The first colloq is a time to get everyone on the same page and kind of get their blessings before you set off to do the research part of your dissertation. I don't really think a first colloq would be useful unless you've identified a field of variation you want to explain, formulated a question that has some empirical content related to that variation, and come up with like a proto-theory. In a perfect world, you'd want to be able to walk out of your colloq, celebrate reaching that milestone, and then be ready to jump straight into the new collection. The second colloq, and this is borrowing from a member of my committee, but I think it's a good way to think about it, is that data collection never goes as planned. Your proto-theory probably isn't exactly right or exactly what you want it to be. And so your dissertation project changes a lot after you start doing it. A good time for the second colloq is when no one is on the same page anymore about what you're doing and what kind of support you need. And the second colloq is a good opportunity to bring everyone back into the room, maybe make them put their phones away, and get everyone back on the same page. Rich Nielsen, who was on my committee, also says something which I think is important to think about for a second colloq, which is that gathering of you and your committee is the last opportunity to make major changes to what's going to become your dissertation research. So that's kind of helpful for thinking about scheduling.
Okay, so there was a question I had. So you're competing for time with other graduate students to get your colloqs in. What did you learn as far as the timing and having to deal with other colloqs as far as coordinating? What are the techniques that you use to keep your dissertation on track?
So on the micro level, colloqs all bunch up towards the end of the semester because the end of the semester is just kind of a forcing mechanism. I did both my first and second colloq pretty much as early as I could, or not as early as I could within the semester, but much earlier than a lot of other people. My thought there was that colloqs are about a phase of the research that is like much longer than 2 or 3 weeks. So doing it a little earlier versus a little later isn't really going to change the content or change the quality of the feedback you get. So I just kind of tried to beat the rush, and that made it a little easier to get it on the schedule. Was there a second part to that question? Sorry, Phil.
No, there wasn't, but we're getting towards the end of this period. So what do you have saved up? What additional advice do you have?
Yeah, 2 things. Thing one, take the colloquium presentation seriously and make it like a good polished presentation, even though it's relatively internal. It's an opportunity to sell your research and make a good case for it. It's great practice for other times you're going to have to do that. And I've also found that good presentations that are well put together prompt a lot more engagement and a lot better feedback. So it's good to invest time in that. The last thing I would say is, I think especially for SSP folks, when you're looking at going to an archive or doing a lot of deep historical research, it's tempting to go into the first colloq without a huge amount of empirical validation. I personally wished I would have done it a little harder in my 3rd year in terms of assembling like a plausibility probe for my theory. Because once I got to the point of data collection, there was a lot of nail biting and anxiety about whether I was just totally wrong. And I could have pushed that earlier and probably been more productive.
Okay, well, that's great advice, to do a little bit of the empirics so that your theory development is a little bit further along, or at least a lower uncertainty when you hit that first colloq. Well, that's great advice today, Aidan. I'm getting ready to close off. Did you forget anything, or are you ready to call this one a day?
I think we're good. Thank you, Phil.